They can't find the people. I had one case where a company up in Wisconsin just recently, they lost 2 people in one of their departments. So the general manager is a very hands-on guy. He went back there and for 2 weeks he was working in that department. He recognized that they've got to automate this now.
The Industrial Growth Institute podcast connects you with the big thinkers, makers, and subject matter experts across all aspects of an integrated B2B industrial revenue growth function. From strategy, board oversight and transactions, through all the phases of manufacturing marketing, the complexities of industrial sales, and the nuances of marketing and sales technology and customer experience, I speak with guests who bring insights, innovative perspectives, best practices, and twists on traditional approaches. Each episode explores high-level thinking and in-the-weeds actionable tactics. If you enjoyed these discussions, then please help me out by liking and sharing the podcast, and especially by leaving a comment and giving a review. So with no further ado, let's jump into this episode. I'm Ed Marsh, and I'm happy to welcome everyone listening to this episode of the Industrial Growth Institute podcast. Growth, as in industrial growth, is a big topic, and it means everything from strategy through marketing and sales, organic and inorganic growth, sales channel, aftermarket revenue, customer experience, et cetera. So it touches on a lot of topics, and today's guest actually has insight into many of those. Kurt Palmer is a chemist by training who spent nearly 30 years working in a family business that was a distributor of materials to the printed circuit board industry. He spent a lot of time selling and was involved in a leadership and ownership transition within that business. Later, he participated in a sale of that business to one of their key suppliers and stayed on through that transition until he was recruited to run the U.S. operation of a German manufacturer of equipment selling to the PCB industry. And then subsequently to his current role as CEO of Schmoll North America, another U.S. daughter company of a German manufacturer that builds machines used in printed circuit board manufacturing. So we've got family business operations and ownership and leadership transition and channel sales and international business, a business sale, capital equipment sales, and more, all kinds of stuff. So I'm looking forward to have Kurt take us through his journey and his learnings from it. Everyone watching and listening, please take a moment right now, like the episode, drop a comment. I read them all and I will reply. And so with that, thank you for joining me, Kurt. We've been trying to schedule this for a while. I'm thrilled that we're finally together.
I am too, Ed. It's been, you're right. It's been a while trying to put this together. That introduction makes me feel old. And the fact is I am old. My 60th birthday is only a couple of days away. But yeah, I've been doing this a while, but great to be here.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
All right, so let's kind of wind back to the beginning. Why chemistry?
That's in college, like most kids these days, they don't really know what they want to do. And the reason I chose chemistry is at that time, I wanted to be a doctor. So I quickly, asking about pre-med degrees and whatnot, and looking at what's the best undergraduate degree to go with to set you up for med school. Chemistry was one of them. So I had already taken some of the basic chemistry classes. I felt I liked it, and that's why I got into it. But then, ironically, I didn't use that degree much in my career afterwards. So that's how I did it. And then, obviously, I didn't didn't go to med school either.
Right. So, had your dad started the Tapco business, or was it a generation before that? How did that business start?
He started it just before I went to college. So I think the year of my high school graduation, my dad started Tapco, which was the business that I eventually joined after college.
Okay. So you didn't grow up in that business. It wasn't kind of this thing that you talked about at every family get together at Thanksgiving. It was relatively late in your development that he started that.
For sure. He was in the same industry that he started the business in. So I knew a little bit about PCB, raw materials and whatnot. And that was the business that he eventually started in 1982. But it wasn't a family business until, like I said, I graduated high school.
So if you started it kind of as you were finishing high school and you went to school thinking about being a doctor, it wasn't then just assumed that you were going to be joining in a family business.
No, it wasn't. That was actually much later. My brother Todd, 4 years older than me, graduated 4 years before I did. He joined the business, I think, after a year after my dad started it. And so I saw a family member going into it, but I was still full bore ahead going with my pre-med and never had a thought about joining the family business at that time. it wasn't until summers between college years, going back to the family business to work in the back, sharing material, making deliveries to customers, just doing everything that it was a great summer gig for 3 years.
Right.
Even then, I didn't think I would be going into the business. It was just after the fact where I graduated, had a little bit of trouble in 1986, finding a different job. And meanwhile, working in the family business, again, working in the warehouse, doing that sort of thing. I think it was then my dad approached me after about 6 months of doing that and said, "Hey, what do you think?"
And when you joined formally, was that to step into a sales role, or did you join in the warehouse and eventually evolve into sales?
It was to get into a sales role. Yeah, it was to get into a sales role, work side by side with my brother. We were the only two sales guys, other than my dad, who was the consummate salesman. He was a great guy to learn from, not only in sales but the financial side of the business. He was a great mentor to both of us.
And obviously, as you were learning from him sales, was he following some sort of a formal program? Like, had he had Xerox as a younger person in business himself, or had he just learned sales himself?
He was working his prior career, prior to starting Tapco. He was the VP of sales for a large manufacturing company. So he was trained at that company. He was a civil engineer by degree, but I don't think he had any formal training. He never, other than some Dale Carnegie courses and whatnot that I know he participated in. He never mentioned any formal training, that I should take on myself, or Todd, my brother, should take on. He was just he trained us on the job, taking us to see customers, just taught us what it was like, or what you need to do to make customers happy.
Right.
And that was my training early on.
And this was Chicagoland. Was the business geographically constrained to Chicagoland, or were you doing business around the country?
In the beginning, when I joined in 86, it was only Chicagoland, and that meant 8 or 10 states in the upper Midwest.
Okay.
But my dad had some foresight, and within 8 or 10 months, he asked Todd if he wanted to go open an office in Minneapolis. And Todd jumped on that opportunity. So he split us up early, which, I think we would have been fine had he not done that. But it was a really good idea, I think, for him to do. And so Todd and I, from that point on, managed our own little, our fiefdoms. He managed Minneapolis and the upper Midwest, and I managed the Chicago office.
And is that still an area of considerable density for PCB manufacturing, or has that moved to the West Coast, for instance?
It is. No, Chicago, Minneapolis, both are good areas for high density. I would say in Chicago, there's 15 board shops just in Chicagoland itself. You go up to Milwaukee, there's a couple more, and it's not a bad area to be for printed circuit board suppliers. Minneapolis, similar, very big operation up in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, which is an hour from Minneapolis, and a good, I think, 8 or 10 shops in the Twin Cities themselves. So those are both two good markets for this industry.
And then at some point, you and your brother took the business over from your dad. How did that process go? Were there a lot of deliberate conversations leading up to it gradually? Did you hire consultants to help with that? Or did one day he say, "You know what, it's time, boys, you guys are in charge now"?
It was interesting. So as a distributor, we have what we call principals, companies that we represent, whose products we sell. And our major product was laminate, and it was manufactured in Southern California at the time. That company was looking to sell their business. That laminate manufacturer was looking to sell their business, and we knew it. And I don't know if my dad approached them or they approached my dad, but they asked him to come out and run it and prepare it for sale in the early 90s. So my dad at that time was only 46, I believe it was. And I'm sorry, 56. He was 56. So he went out in the early 90s and left Tapco, basically the day-to-day, to my brother and myself when we were still pretty young. So that was sort of the soft transition of the business of him getting out. And so he, for 2 years, ran that business in California. Of course, we talked to him quite often. And once the company was sold, he said, hey, things are going well. He was 57 years old or so. He said, I'm done. You guys just keep running it. So at that point, we continued to run our operations separately with separate P&Ls. Of course, we shared some costs and whatnot, but we sort of competed with one another in a very good way. But at some point, and I think it was probably 8 or 10 years later, it was time to pick a president of the company and move forward. And that was I think it was a Christmas time conversation in my dad's basement at a card table, where my brother was perfectly happy to have me take the leadership role. He and I were best of friends, and so it wasn't a difficult transition. I think he expected it at that time, and that comment coming from him made everything obviously quite simple.
So the three of you sorted it out. You didn't have an extensive list of consultants to help navigate that process.
No, we didn't bring anybody in. We did not bring anybody in at that time.
And then at what point did you decide, or did you and your brother end up buying it from your dad, or not?
Yeah, we did. In the early 2000s, we ended up buying it from my dad. Yeah. We worked it all out. I don't even recall the entire process that was involved at that time. But of course, my dad gifted as much as he could to us. So it worked out real well. But that was in the early 2000s.
It's I would say a blessing that you don't remember. That must mean that it was relatively smooth. Sometimes those are so fraught with frustration and legal and accounting and finance challenges that you don't remember it, I think is great.
I mean, I do remember we did evaluation.
Sure.
I don't know what it was. I don't recall that and how that all worked out. But yeah, we had just our outside local attorney do that, work that all out for us.
That's great. And so then when you and your brother were formally responsible for running the operation, and or once you owned it, did you agree on certain kind of big changes or new approaches or growth plans, or was it really just an extension of what you'd been doing all along?
Well, the industry at that time was consolidating a bit, especially after Y2K. A lot of the customers closed up or put a lot of their resources into Asia. And the Asian market grew dramatically. Of course, we weren't supporting that at all. So we saw business slowing down a little bit. And we felt what we needed to do is go national. And so in 2005, we agreed for our growth, we needed to start to either grow organically or look at somebody to buy and take us to a national platform.
Mm-hmm.
And it was perfect timing because we were approached by a national distributor. They were owned by the same group that owned Napa Auto Parts.
Really?
EIS is their name. They had a national distributorship doing a lot of the same things that we were doing, but they wanted to get out of the business. So they approached us, and what was probably about 8 or 10 months of negotiations of every asset and the whole purchase price. We ended up buying them in 2005, and next thing you know, we were a national distributor.
Wow. So inorganic growth, I'm sure there were some important lessons learned from that process.
Painful. Yeah, really painful lessons. I can tell you one of the biggest lessons that cost us, I think, if I look back, about $250,000, and we weren't that big of a company. That was a big amount. Was just not having freight contracts set up with the major freight carriers. So we came in thinking that all the contracts would carry over to us. And next thing you know, all of these freight lanes that we're using now with the new company that we're not used to are charging us full price. And as you probably know, in the freight industry, you can get some pretty big discounts. You just need to negotiate them.
Right.
And so we went on with that for 3 or 4 months. That was a big lesson that we learned. And the other, probably the bigger lesson from a selling organization standpoint is just we made decisions about our sales team too quickly. We had a team of about 5 at Tapco, and we had a team of 6 very high level people, mostly in sales at the acquired company. And we put people in positions immediately without really understanding their strengths, weaknesses, what they'd all done. We did it based on what their titles were at the old company. And there were some mistakes made there for sure. And so,
and in the middle of the aughts, sales was honestly a lot simpler than it is now. So if you were experiencing some of those challenges in that environment, I can only imagine what those challenges would be like if you were doing that today.
Yeah, I think it would be even that much harder, that much more difficult. But yeah, those are things that was a couple of big lessons we learned early on, and cost us quite a bit of money in the transition for those first 2 years or so.
But then you sorted that out. You got on a good runway to growth, and then in 2015 you sold actually to one of your suppliers. Was a transaction planned, or was it just kind of opportunistic and unexpected? They popped up and made some sort of an offer.
I would say both.
Okay.
I would say both. Todd and I now in 2015, we're in our young 50s, and we are both thinking about an exit plan. Were we aggressively out looking? I would say no, but we happened to be in a meeting February of 15 in Taiwan with our supplier, and we recognized that there's a husband-wife owner, and the contact was Mrs. Tao was her name. I remember her. I still talk to her today. She wanted to develop their footprint more globally. She had presence in Europe. She had a presence in all over Asia. The only place that she didn't really have any brick and mortar was North America.
Mm-hmm.
So we brought it up to her, and she right away expressed interest. And 6 months later, we sold the business in August of 15.
Have you ever regretted doing that?
Yes and no. Yes and no. I mean, it's a completely set of different stresses when you own your own business. For a lot of those years, we were beholden to the bank. We had our ups and downs, and as a distributor with $10 or $15 million of inventory, we were borrowing money to finance that at times, and in good times, as we all know, that's great. Nobody bothers you. But when you miss a covenant here or there, and that happened a couple of times in the years, and those are stresses that I would never want to relive. So, but I also really liked being an owner of the business. I really liked that, and I miss that to a degree.
Yeah. What about that loss of identity? When suddenly you go one day you're the man, the next day you're maybe another individual contributor.
Yeah, that was a big shock to the system for sure. It was a big shock to the system, and staying on with the new company, of course, things didn't change overnight,
right?
But gradually they certainly do. It's like boiling a frog, right? Of course, the owning company, rightfully so, takes more and more of the responsibility, makes more and more of the decisions, and
sure.
And of course, not all those decisions would be those you would make yourself had if I'd stayed on and been the owner. So, that's a little bit of a transition too, to get used to that.
So you sold to a strategic. Obviously, 10 years later, there's all kinds of cash washing around chasing deals as financial buyers are looking to acquire companies. Have you kind of stayed involved at all with transactions? Do you have any observations on how it's changed, or are you just divorced from that now?
For the past, when I left TCT Circuit Supply, the acquiring company, I did go to a company that was owned by a financial buyer, basically, and so. But I wasn't close to the transactions. I knew the owners; they were Germany based, and but more or less was out of that. The financial side of the business from the ownership perspective.
Mm-hmm. Were there any particular lessons that came out of your transaction experience that you think made you a better business leader or manager?
And particularly the transaction, selling the business,
Yes.
selling Tapco.
Yeah.
For sure, I think the making sure that the employees of the business that stay on. I think I should have done a better job of making sure they were put in the right positions and make sure that was all solidified during the transition or during the negotiations.
Got it.
Because in my opinion, some of that was done, was not done properly. And so It could have been done a little bit differently.
Okay. So then you had either an earn-out period or some sort of a commitment where you continued to work there. You reached a point where you left, and then kind of a fairly big life changes. You left Chicagoland, and you moved out of suburbia into urban life in Greensboro. Do you recommend that folks selling a family business draw some sort of a clear line like that just delineates when the new chapter begins?
Well, for us, it was good timing for that change and where we live, because, of course, at our age, all of our friends were looking to move south, and we were looking to do the same thing, for personal reasons. But drawing that delineation from the business perspective, there was no office in the Chicagoland area anymore after we sold the business. That was one of the first decisions that was made, was to consolidate that office and move it into the Twin Cities office, where business was a little bit stronger at that time.
Right.
So there was no office there. I was just living there in Chicago and commuting to the Twin Cities.
Got it.
Myself. So that's how we did it for those 4 years while I stayed on with TCT.
I see. So in that business, you were indirect sales channel, you were distribution, and
Correct.
Then you switched models. So you went kind of, on the one hand, you remained sales channel because you were doing distribution as the U.S. subsidiary of the German manufacturer, but you also sold through channel as a manufacturer. So you kind of had this switch where you went from the distribution side to the manufacturing side. There's a lot of friction typically between those. Talk about how that change in perspectives, helped you understand some of that friction in different ways.
Yes, because as a distributor working with independently with other principals, we didn't get involved in the manufacturing, even try to understand the manufacturing. We were always out for ourselves, right? To maximize our customer satisfaction, maximize our margin and our revenue.
Right.
But once we were part of a bigger company with the manufacturer basically owning us as a distributor, we very much were made aware of manufacturing costs and the need to share margin and to always be sensitive to price and what it takes to keep the manufacturer whole as well. That was a big change for us. Especially being owned by private equity and having to looking at numbers and looking at profitability, both the manufacturer and the distributor were equally important.
Right. But often companies inadvertently, they recognize they've got different perspectives, they've got different value propositions, they've got different things they worry about. And that's kind of sometimes explicitly discussed, sometimes it's just understood. But it seems like for all of the best intentions, everyone wins if you can figure out how to minimize those points of friction. But for some reason, they often bubble up. Do you have any thoughts, having been on both sides, any thoughts on why that tends to happen invariably?
Well, I think a lot of it starts with the fact that people believe that distribution, a lot of people believe that distribution is an unnecessary function. So specifically from the point of view of a distributor, that's very frustrating. So when you're working with a manufacturer who, not necessarily top management, but definitely middle management, they believe that what's the role of the distributor? What value are you adding? The friction really develops there, and they want to know why why should we sell to a distributor who's only going to mark it up and take money out of the manufacturer's pocket? So we found ourselves having to justify the role of a distributor on a regular basis to try to minimize that friction, as you say.
And so then when you're in the role on the other side, bringing this capital equipment in from Germany and selling it in some cases through channel in the U.S., how did you structure those relationships with the benefit of that insight?
The relationships with our other, with the manufacturer?
No, with the channel partners,
with the channel partners
who are reselling for you.
It was a constant battle. I have to say it was a constant battle, but the market sort of dictated that, Ed, in that the channel partners that we developed were channel partners who were probably at one time with a competitor of ours, or they're in the industry for some time, and in certain the markets develop in a way that the expectations on these channel partners are that they'll make X commission if they do this function, and you can't develop a relationship with a channel partner if you don't go by those rules. Mm-hmm. So I think, but communicating that back up to the manufacturer took a little bit of effort.
Right. Switching gears a little bit, you've got a pretty intense travel schedule. What habits have you developed that help you keep up with everything when you're traveling 200 days a year or whatever it is?
I'll give you a comment that I hate people say, and that is, I travel so much, I don't have time to work out, or I travel so much, I eat horribly because I'm on the road. Well, being on the road doesn't mean you're stopping by McDonald's every night. It doesn't mean that you're bellying up to the bar at the hotel and having 2 beers before bed. And that's what people have to get away from, that thinking. So I stay at hotels that have gyms. And if I go to an area more often than not, or more than once, I find out who has the best gyms, good equipment. I like to do cardio, and I pack clothes for it, and I make that part of my routine every day. So I am at the at the airport. I'm taking the stairs, not the escalator.
Right.
Just things like that to get in the steps, because otherwise it is difficult to travel. There's certainly, you're introduced, or you're put in front of tough choices when it comes to eating all the time. You're out with customers, you're out with your coworkers, and you're out for pizza.
Right.
It's hard,
right.
But everything in moderation, and work it out every day. It's the way you keep feeling good, and you keep the energy up throughout the day. And
so managing stress and maintaining some fitness. But how about the workload? I mean, if all you have is to work from your phone or a laptop screen, and you've got responsibilities around the world, how do you juggle all that?
I've tried to be a better delegator, and I work on that constantly. That's not natural for me, and so I've recently listened to some books on delegation. I know that in order to get it all done, you got to be able to delegate. But right. I carry with me a separate keyboard and mouse, and I just make sure that I make it comfortable and easy wherever I go. But I think you have to become a better delegator when you're traveling all the time.
Right. So we actually met originally when you had a sales hiring problem, and I think you were searching something on the web. You found an article I had written that resonated. You engaged with it actually through a chat bot. And that was interesting to me, because I often hear from folks like you, kind of in our demographic, age and stage in career, that, well, our buyers don't use chatbots, but you did. Is that something that's common, or do you remember that? Do you remember what triggered that?
Well, for me, I was going and I asked the question, how to hire good salespeople. And I don't remember where you popped up on the search, but I looked at that article that you had mentioned, that you wrote a couple years ago, and it's the first time I used a chatbot. We I think in our business, I don't think it's sort of foreign to people in my business because there's only 200 board shops in North America, and most people know one another, so they know who to go to if they if they have a question or if they want to do a search for materials or equipment. They'll find us pretty quickly online. But that process, finding you, that worked out real well for me. The article that you wrote just hit all of the points that I felt were needed to find a good equipment salesperson, and it worked out for us.
And what were the frustrations that you were having?
Up to that point, most of the people that we would talk to for sales roles were people that were in the industry in some way, shape, or form. And what we found out, and I hired many people, industry specific people with 20, 30 years experience, is that they were very, set in their ways. They didn't necessarily know how to sell, but they knew people.
Right.
And in a small industry, certainly that helps. It can get you in the door, but were they closers? No, not necessarily. It's pretty rare in a small industry to find really, really good salespeople. And so we'd been through a few people. In a 30-year career, you're going to go through salespeople that aren't going to work out real well, especially when you're just finding, industry veterans that don't know the sales process A to Z.
And was most of that hiring or identification of candidates through recruiters or through your network?
A little bit of both. We tried going through recruiters, and they would mostly bring people in the industry. Sometimes people that we knew already.
Right.
Some people we would say, yeah, we know that person. We either talked to them already, or I wouldn't hire them.
Right.
Sometimes they might bring somebody that you would give a try, but they would always bring people from the industry with experience.
Mm-hmm.
And we would do the same thing through our channels, through our just people that we knew, reach out directly to them.
And your process was kind of typical, if I remember correctly. You would get a name, you review resumes, and spend time interviewing folks. Where do you think that was breaking down?
Well, I think it was our mindset that was wrong. We just felt that when you had a person that was with the industry experience, and you'd interview them, and they'd tell you how many people that they knew and how they know the product well, you thought, okay, that just means they're going to be successful. They can break down doors. So the process helped us find candidates, but it didn't help us find candidates who knew how to sell.
Did you ever hesitate to fire somebody because the hiring process was going to be so time intensive and you weren't certain that you'd end up with somebody better?
Oh, for sure. We would, we held on to many people for years. And, I think that's natural.
Right.
You just don't think you're going to find somebody that's going to, easily, that's going to come in and outperform your existing people. And on the sales side, we would hold on to people, way too long. It's a tough process.
Sure, absolutely. So then we started talking about this, what I would call an engineered process, including using a predictably accurate sales specific assessment. Were you? I mean, you were obviously, you were very polite about the conversations, but were you skeptical at first?
I was not. No, the article you wrote sold me, Ed. I felt really good about it. I felt really good about the fact that how the system comes back, the assessment comes back, it scores people, and really tells you about their chance of success as a salesperson. And it looks at at so many factors. So I felt pretty good about that. Some of the candidates that we would get, I would sometimes be a little skeptical and have to really go through a second interview to really understand what kind of a salesperson they might be. But for the most part, I was sold pretty early on to the process. Now that changed a little bit. Not for me, but it was a little bit difficult to convince others in my organization over time.
Well, you described a mindset change, and that's a journey that somebody has to go through. And if somebody just kind of shows up and suddenly, abruptly, they're handed that, they don't get the opportunity to go through that journey to develop the understanding and kind of acculturate to it. So I'm not surprised about that.
Right. I think that most people that hire salespeople, most sales managers just do it the old-fashioned way,
Right.
looking for people who've got experience in the industry. And so when I was working with my German counterparts, it was difficult to get them to convince them that this was the route to go. Not necessarily look for people in the industry, but look for people who know how to sell.
Right.
It took some time and some convincing, and I wasn't able to convince everybody in the end to continue going that route.
Yeah, I think that Germans sell differently as well. And so it makes sense that they would value the technical credentials very highly because that is fundamental to the way they sell. Whereas Americans tend to buy in a perhaps less disciplined, a bit more chaotic way, maybe more driven by business realities than by technical requirements. So that creates a little bit of a dissonance as well.
Yeah, you're right. The Germans, they sell technically, and they think their machines should be bought on the technical features alone. Our machines are the best. Can't you see? Look how they're engineered.
Right.
This feature does this does that. It's perfect for what you need, and you should know that, right?
Right.
And it's not done that way here. As you said, it can be chaotic. There can be several stakeholders in the purchase of a machine. Of course, there's financial stakeholders, there's engineering people, quality people.
Right.
There's all of that. And that's why you need somebody who doesn't just sell technically. Technically, is it probably the technical acumen of a salesperson is probably third or fourth on the list of skills that you need to be able to sell equipment.
I completely agree with that. There's many people that don't, but if you look for that, then in my experience, what you end up with, or what I would call industry retread, you kind of alluded to this, every 3 years, they're changing. And you wonder why they're changing. There's always some good story about what happened. But the reality is they go in with a lot of enthusiasm. They start missing quota, and it takes a while before that catches up with them. The chitter chatter only carries them so far. Eventually, they have to be able to get into new accounts. They have to get new projects. They have to close deals, and many of them can't.
Right, especially on their commission base, so that's why they don't last very long. They have to move on to their next role. But right. They're not real closers. I mean, yeah, they can sell technically, but so can the other three guys that you're up against. And so it's a process. It has to be managed, and that takes a specific set of skills.
Right. So you've been in precision manufacturing all along, but on two sides. We talked about being a channel and then with a manufacturer, but you've also been materials and then for the last 5 years, capital equipment. And I think many people end up sticking with one track or the other through their careers. What insights have you gained from being on both sides of that?
Well, the equipment side is more challenging because of the fact that the cycles are so much, the amplitude of the cycles in the business is so much higher and lower, right? From a consumable side, when things get 20% soft at our customers, you sell 20% less consumables. But a lot of times you sell 100% less equipment when things get soft. People
Right.
just stop buying. So that's the challenge of an equipment manufacturer. And fundamentally, you have to find ways to build your business up on the non-equipment side, and that's through service and parts sales. I mean, parts are consumable, and of course, even when things are soft, you're going to sell parts. Service wise, we have to build our business up through service contracts, preventive maintenance, and whatnot, so that in a year where we had absolutely zero equipment sales, we're still making enough revenue to pay for all of our technicians and whatnot, and still able to eke out a little bit of profit.
Right.
That's the fundamental difference between the two businesses from a financial standpoint.
But it sounds like the key that you're talking about is beginning to incorporate some recurring revenue models, whether it's for maintenance or it could be IIoT, remote monitoring and diagnostics. It could be training programs. That's something that many machine companies have a hard time thinking about. They tend to think transactionally as opposed to building those contractual relationships. What have you seen about any trends, or do you think machine companies are more open to thinking about that than they have been in the past?
I certainly we are. I mean, we have to be, but yeah, I think the successful ones certainly are. Even in our small PCB industry, we have. I could name 10 of our fellow equipment suppliers who have got really good service programs. 3-year contracts, things like that help balance that revenue out over the tough times.
Mm-hmm.
So I in our specific industry, yes, I've seen more and more of that, and I think that'll continue.
And is that pulled through by the customers because of the requirement that they run 24/7 and they just can't afford to be down, or is that driven by the manufacturers who are showing up and adding this additional value?
I think more the latter,
Really?
but I would say it's not a difficult sell. It's
Okay.
not a difficult sell when you can talk to them about the downtime, minimizing downtime, being more planful like that. There's still, of the 200 customers that we have, there's still maybe a third, not a quarter to a third, who don't think they need maintenance contracts, who are just as happy, buying on the fly when things go down. But those are the same guys who aren't investing a lot, and I question, really their long-term prospects for success.
But that means more than half are, and that's a much higher number than I would have expected. Do you have a rule of thumb of what you think companies consider reasonable in terms of an annual percentage of a new machine cost for ongoing maintenance and support?
For us, it varies a little bit on the type of equipment, because some of the equipment that we sell have components that are extremely expensive. And when they go down hard. It's just the nature of the business.
Mm-hmm.
So those preventive maintenance contracts involve some insurance programs and whatnot. And of those, the annual maintenance costs could be up to 20% of the equipment itself. Really? Yeah, but typically it's somewhere between 5 and 10%.
Got it. So you and I have talked about content and marketing topics. We never really dove too deep into it, but one of the pieces of that is partnerships to reach other audiences. And I know this year your company Schmoll has launched a seminar series on various topics related to PCB manufacturing, which is not my industry, and so I don't really understand, but it seems like it's not just the stuff your machines do, but rather broader topics within PCB manufacturing. Even I saw, I think, some partnerships with some of your customers. Talk about the origin of that and how that's being received.
It did start within Schmoll, Germany. They've hired a team to basically develop that and push it down to within their equipment building, the departments for the various equipment that they sell. Mm-hmm. It then came out of that what I would call like solution seminars, where we're taking the information and marketing materials on a road show, inviting customers to come and listen in and participate. And that's just, that's in its infancy. We've only done a couple this year, but those are continuing on. Internet of Things is a big buzz too. And so we're integrating our equipment into more of the Internet of Things type of mindset for just better communications on the manufacturing floor. Mm-hmm. And so we're doing more, I would say, seminars and talks of that at our trade shows and whatnot as we move forward. But that's coming from the marketing team in Germany, and it's great to have a good team that has our back, right, to help us promote the product all over the world.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a pretty, I'd say, advanced strategy that you don't see often in the machinery manufacturing space. So I'd say kudos to them for having had that vision and implementing it.
Yeah, that's. I think we, in the printed circuit board side or in that business, it has become a more marketing intensive business now. It's at Schmoll in particular. Circuit boards are continually advancing, right? We're putting more and more structures into a smaller and smaller footprint. Mm-hmm. So your car probably has 18 to 20 circuit boards in it. You don't even know where they are. Wow. Because they're so small. They're doing so much. And in order to be able to build boards like that, you have to have equipment that is advanced. And people are really pushing the envelope, including, of course, Schmoll, with all the features and options that they put into their machines. So you've got to be able to take that message out to customers, tell them what, so they know what you're doing,
right,
and how we can help.
You mentioned, speaking of trade shows, I know German companies traditionally rely on trade shows for most of the leads. Are there trends that you're observing in industrial trade shows that make you comfortable that can remain a primary source, or do you think that becomes less important and you have to drive more leads in other ways?
For us, actually, the trade shows that we attend, there's basically, from our standpoint, being North American, there's just one per year. It's called the IPC show. It's now in California. There's also every other year show that a lot of our customers go to in Munich called Productronica, and that's a great show as well. But at both of the shows, lead generation is not the main driver. The main driver, or the main result of the shows, are several great meetings with customers that you already know, that want to talk to the technical people that we have at the show about an idea, or about some capacity they need to develop, or about some new challenging circuit boards they're building. And do you have a solution for us? So it's the place to sit and have those technical discussions with those customers, and we will come out. So when I say leads, they're not new leads. There's definitely leads to follow up on. There's opportunities that come out of these discussions. That's what it's all about. But they're not.
But if your TAM is only 200 companies, then I guess you don't need a trade show for lead generation. You know who they all are, and if you've got good salespeople, they can be prospecting to those 200 all the time.
Exactly. Yeah. They already knew who we are. And
right.
So, as I said, it's just more for those high-end technical discussions.
Got it. So I've also noticed that Schmoll North America has been leaning into LinkedIn company posts lately. What's your experience been with that?
I don't know for sure if it drives a lot of business, but I think to be relevant, and especially with people under 40, they're really looking to, what are you posting, right? What's going on? There's definitely, it's a marketing tool. And when you are posting regularly on LinkedIn, whether it's new equipment that you want to showcase, whether it's we have Meet the Team on LinkedIn, which people get to meet our service team, learn a little bit about them. Just having something regularly there, I think you fall behind if you don't have that. And so, it's just keeping the name out there. And that's why we utilize it as much as we do.
So you're not doing it with specific KPIs or metrics in mind where you want to see you hit this number by the end of the year, or you're going to discontinue it. You think it's just something as part of business that you need to do.
Something that's part of business. It's obviously relatively cheap, right? So, but no, we're not necessarily measuring our success in any way. We just, it's just remaining relevant. Of course, I look to see who likes the posts and whatnot, and I always know the people because, again, it's a small industry.
Right. All right. So for rising generations and family businesses, thinking of yourself and your brother when your dad kind of pulled you in and then began to turn it over to you, what advice would you offer about transitions and transactions and careers after the transaction, even if there's a significant windfall?
There's a lot of questions in that one question, Ed.
Well, you got a lot of wisdom, so share it with us.
Being very, very planful, and just because you're a family that all gets along, doesn't mean you don't have to document things. And because I think 9 times out of 10, there's going to be some rifts, and those rifts occur at those big inflection points when you need to promote somebody and do a big role, or when you're going to sell the business.
Right.
So I think discussing all of that stuff as much as you can up front, laying out responsibilities very clearly. This is what you do. These are the expectations. Having that all dialed in is really, really important. I mean, We never had to execute on this, but of course the first we had what do they call them? The first to pass insurance
Right.
policies,
Key man policies.
Key man policies that we had.
Right.
Super important, to take care of the family. All of that stuff has to be really, really well thought through. One of the guys that was I was in this group called the President's Forum when I was running TAPCO here in Chicago. I was in it for 15 years. And we had a council within the group where we would go around to each other's businesses every month.
Mm-hmm.
And we would tackle 2 or 3 issues of that business, whoever was hosting. And one of the gentlemen that was in my council, he was maybe 65 at the time, much bigger company than TAPCO. He had several holdings, but it was a family business. And he used to go around the world attending family business seminars. And he would come back with some, just some great ideas. They would hold family council meetings once a year off site where people in the business and people out of the business, but part of the family were attending, and
mm-hmm.
communication was the real key about, and he still had his issues with family. There's
we're all complicated creatures.
We're all complicated creatures who think we deserve more than we really do. So I learned a lot from that gentleman, and but that was what he did. He just treated it like the biggest responsibility he had was just managing the family dynamics.
Right. And it feels like there's a lot more resources now available than there were 10 or 15 or 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think that obviously you can do a lot of your own research on the internet now, and there's a lot more on there that'll really help out.
Right.
When you're at a point where you just don't know, how to handle a certain thing, but there's a lot more on there, especially with AI these days, can really help out. But I haven't used that in a while since I've been out of the family business now for 9 years.
Yeah, I think even a lot of attention to board governance and board operations and board effectiveness. There seem to be trends where even smaller companies, family-owned businesses, are getting very deliberate about their board as well as managing the family. So you've kind of got this Venn diagram of family and business and how it all fits together. And there are a lot of resources.
And from my experience being in the family business for 25 years, our board certainly became more of an instrumental part of managing the business as time went on. Mm-hmm. It was something that we developed, and the roles and responsibilities of the board really became more and more important.
Did you have independent directors?
No, we did not. No,
but you're able to separate business management from board oversight, even though you had many of the same people in both.
Yeah, I think we were, because we knew what the requirements were of the board, and we had our roles documented, and we really treated those seriously.
Interesting. All right. How about a mistake that you made along the way that you thought, oh my goodness, this is, I'm cooked, but it really turned out well in the end?
A mistake that I thought I was cooked, but turned out well. That's I can tell you mistakes that I did that didn't turn out that well in the end, and that's how I remember them so well. But let me think about a mistake that and I can't think of one that turned out well, because I've already put it out of my mind that it wasn't a mistake, or that I did something good.
Makes sense.
But yeah.
So you've worked with a couple German companies. There's lots of stereotypes. What do you think that Germans misunderstand about the U.S. market?
I think we alluded to it earlier. It's the technical side of the business that they think is the only thing that's really, really important. And so when it comes to selling and servicing the customer, and I'm speaking in general terms here. I'm certainly not speaking about my current employer, because they are very unique when it comes to understanding the customer. But it's just that lack of understanding of what really makes the customer happy. It's not just the technical side of the equipment or the service.
Right.
So that's probably number one. And then from beneath that, as I mentioned, my my current the Schmoll is very, they're very customer focused. So I don't really have any recent experience with some of the things that as Germans that they may look at differently. But just from I think it's the technical side that I mentioned before is probably the biggest difference.
Yeah, for sure. From where you sit today, looking out, say 5 years, what changes do you anticipate in the business environment that you think companies ought to be aware of and perhaps taking some preemptive action to prepare for?
Well, it's already started, and it's more the automation side of manufacturing. I think getting qualified manufacturing employees to work these days, it's more and more of a challenge.
Right.
And so on our end, we are rapidly developing equipment that really speeds up and automates the process, all the processes that we participate in, and we're getting more and more demand for that. And I think that's going to continue.
We've definitely crossed a Rubicon where it used to be 10 years ago, people talked about automation in terms of reducing cost, reducing headcount, reducing cost. And now it's completely shifted to where they can't find the right people. And now they need automation to keep the facility running.
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? They can't find the people. I had one case where this is a company up in Wisconsin. Just recently, they lost 2 people in one of their departments. And so the general manager is a very hands-on guy. He went back there, and for 2 weeks, he was working in that department too. And he recognized in that they've got to automate this now.
Right.
And so they called us, and with the equipment we have, the automation for feeding and removing panels from the machines, and they're going to be moving forward with that because even this is a shop in Wisconsin where they just can't find people that want to do the work. Unemployment's not like super low there. They just can't find people that want to do the work.
Right. So we're recording this in late September 2024. I was at IMTS a couple of weeks ago, and certainly one of the themes is automating a lot of the steps, feeding the machining centers and automating changeovers. So that's, I think, a consistent theme across industries.
Yeah, I think in 5 years, we're going to just be further and further along that path. There's no question.
Will we reach that lights out factory aspirational goal?
In our business, I don't think so.
No.
PCBs require 35 or 40 processes to make a board, from the incoming raw material, fiberglass and copper, to a finished circuit board with the green solder mask put on it and ready to ship to the stuffing house. It's in all the processes. There's so many variables that nobody's figured it out yet, and we've had people try. We've had greenfield operations start up. There's one in particular I think probably began 8 years ago, and that was just there earlier this week. And to this day, they can't do everything, as you said, lights out.
Right. Well, a fabulous conversation, Kurt. Thank you very much. Wrap us up with a couple minutes of closing thoughts on transitions, taking over family business, selling it, moving from supplies to machines, from distribution to manufacturing, wherever you think there's additional insight that you can offer where we've taken this journey through this conversation.
Well, it's been a fun career. I've been in printed circuit boards my entire life, but selling into the markets in many, many different ways is as we just discussed. The family business side of it was probably it was the most. I mean, for time wise, it was the most time I spent in my career at any one thing. It's got, as I said, it's got its ups and downs. Thankfully, I had a family in the business with my father and my brother that I got along great with. So I can only tell stories from other people about some things that maybe some things pitfalls to watch out for. But I miss that. I do miss that part of it. But there's definitely some comfort, working for a good German company that is customer focused. That makes the job a lot easier. For sure. When as I say, my parent company, my boss he'll spend $1 million to fix to fix $1 million machine if that ever happened.
Wow.
That's how much we stand behind our equipment, and that makes it easy. That really makes it easy. So from that standpoint, things are the transition into that side of the business and the equipment side has gone very well.
Good. Well, thank you for your time. Thanks very much for your insights and opening up and sharing.
Thanks for asking me to join, Ed. I appreciate this. This was great.
Yeah, my pleasure. For everyone listening, Kurt's done his part now, sharing these insights. Now you have to do yours. Make sure you like, share, and comment on the episode to help others benefit from it. And of course, I'd welcome you as a subscriber if you think you'd find some value on an ongoing basis. I know you've got more ways to spend time than you have time to spend, and I'm sincerely grateful you decided to spend some time today with me and Kurt and the Industrial Growth Institute podcast. So thank you for listening, and thanks for watching.